This is Dr. Kevin Bacon, along with my colleagues, Dr. Graciela Andrango and Dr. Jason Franken. We were asked if we would speak to you a little bit today about understanding COVID-19 and how it's going to, what the potential impacts are on the U.S. ag and food supply chain. Certainly, it has had some impacts, and as we continue to move through time, we're likely to see a number of more impacts related to disruptions in the supply chains. Well, let's start with something a little bit more simple and talk about the shortage of toilet paper. Now, why toilet paper of all things when we're wanting to talk about agriculture? The idea behind this is to help us understand how a supply chain works, right? Shortly after the stay-at-home order started coming out across the country, there was seemed to be a run on toilet paper. Nobody could find toilet paper of all the things to be missing out of the stores. Well, what happened? And what really happened was it wasn't necessarily that people were hoarding it, at least at the beginning. What it really was just a change in consumer behavior. As consumers are changing their daily routines from going to work in offices, factories, wherever it might be, to being forced to stay at home, their needs change. So in turn, consumers rationally picked up an extra package or two of toilet paper and to be a little bit more prepared. That's fine when one or two people do it, but when you've got 100 million plus households doing this, and you've got an industry that relies on just-in-time inventory for delivering product to the stores, it created a real kink in that particular supply chain. And as people started noticing this, well, human behavior is, wow, I better grab some more because the stores are running out. And so that just exacerbated the problem. Now, we're starting to work through that problem, but at the same time, the problem was only really for a portion of what the toilet paper industry was producing. What they were producing for their institutional market was doing just fine. In fact, they were overstocked there because that demand suddenly dried up on them. I have friends that they solved their toilet paper shortage problem by ordering from essentially office supply outlet stores. So understanding that just how changes in consumer behavior or disruptions in a supply chain can impact something as simple and as basic in our lives as toilet paper gives us a little bit of insight on how things are going to be impacted in other sectors of the economy as well. Okay. Okay. I think, Jason, you were going to talk about meatpacking plants.
Yeah, so there have been a number of closures of meatpacking plants here having to do with the COVID-19 outbreak. And, this is going on as plants, of course, try to address employee safety and health issues with some findings of positive cases among employees or among the community where those plants are located. And we're probably going to continue to see some continued rolling closures of plants and reduced processing capacity as this continues to go on, as this COVID-19 epidemic continues for a while. Your point about institutional versus consumer sector holds here as well. These packing plants do package products for both of those sectors, and so that implies the possibility of a bottleneck again there that has to be resolved as we try and move some of that stuff that was going to institutional sectors towards the retail market. in terms of meats, though, we have quite a bit of cold storage and reserves of meat for pork and beef in particular, a little bit less so to the extent for poultry. But there should continue to be meat in the grocery store shelves for the near term, at least. It just might not necessarily be at the packaging sizes or the cuts or maybe that you're looking for. So maybe a little less of the variety available that you would normally see. Really, this is affecting things on the producer side quite a bit more. It's more problematic for them, and we're seeing hog prices that are 48% below what they were at the start of the year. Cattle prices close to 30% below what they were at the start of the year as a result of this. So as you can tell, that implies that it's a bigger deal for the hog producers. So the hog prices really have all but collapsed, and that's because their supply chain is highly dependent on the seamless operation of those plants. If they don't have an outlet for those hogs, then the supply overwhelms the packer demand pretty quickly. And until and unless some of those processing plants can resolve their operational issues, we're going to continue to see a retrenchment in hog production related to lower prices as a result, I'd say. Again, we're going to see this in the beef industry, but probably not to the same extent because there's a little bit more flexibility there in terms of how they can adjust feeding programs and timings of marketings.
All right, so we've heard about a lot of concerns in the milk industry as to why are dairy farmers dumping milk, and I'm struggling to find milk in the grocery store. Or we've got homeless shelters. Why can't we just give them the milk? Well, lots and lots of problems with the reasoning through all of that. First of all, in terms of thinking about milk, we again have an institutional problem of where this milk is being distributed. A lot of milk is consumed away from home, and think of school lunch programs. We've got small half-pint containers that students are getting. In larger settings, or in other settings, it may be milk in a bag that may be several liters or several gallons in size versus the gallon milk jug at home. Well, all these other places, these institutional places are essentially are mostly closed down now. So where does the milk go that was going into that? There is a significant amount of capital invested in these production lines, and the dairy industry or the processing plant is looking at what are our cost issues here in terms of trying to convert some of these lines to maybe service or to package more of that into the retail type of packaging. But how long term is this? Is it worth the cost of that investment? And besides milk, in terms of giving the milk away, well, you can't do that in terms of milk has to be processed. It has to be pasteurized before it's considered safe to drink in terms of potential for bacteria buildup in the milk. So raw milk is generally not considered safe to drink. And besides, who could handle a tanker load of milk being delivered to them? In terms of other issues in processing milk, think of things made out of milk, cheese. We go into a grocery store and buy cheese, and a small package, an 8 ounces of shredded cheese at a time, perhaps. Whereas a restaurant might be buying it in a shredded cheese in a 50-pound box. Again, you've got differences in packaging issues that create a problem. Back at the dairy farm, this again is causing backups in the demand for milk, similar issues as the hog industry. So yes, indeed, it does make it's tragic that we do see milk being dumped. So that's likely to continue until we can figure out some of these supply chain concerns.
Another concern is what happens to other products such as eggs, and what we have seen in the supermarket and maybe in some supermarkets around the country is that producers cannot fill supermarket orders fast enough, even though many grocers put strict limits on how many carton shoppers could buy. And so many producers what are facing right now is no a shortage of eggs, but they don't have cartons available to pack eggs in there. On the other side, we have also producers who are more dependent on the food service market. It means they are more dependent on restaurants, hotels, schools, and other food service outlets. And with those being shut down during this COVID-19 pandemic, what happens is that these producers do not have their market anymore. What we have seen lately is the wholesale price of shelled eggs have actually tripled their price. So it had increased from $1 per dozen at the beginning of March to $3 at the end of the month. However, for the liquid egg product, the price has decreased, and they are selling on 20 cents per pound less than they were selling before. Well,
yes. This is an area where we also run into some regulatory issues because eggs that were packaged and labeled to go into the institutional markets could not be turned around and sold directly into the retail market. So sometimes regulatory issues kind of get in the way. On the other hand, as Dr. Andrango mentioned, this carton issue is a very real problem. And one of the potential solutions of it temporarily is to sell eggs in pallets of 30
eggs
to the pallet. But this is not a typical packaging scenario that customers are used to purchasing. And again, another option would be to allow customers to bring back their own egg cartons into the store. I'll turn it back to Dr. Andrango to speak to some of the regulatory issues or some of the store issues, concerns about doing that.
Well, for having those 30 egg flats, what happened is that some consumers are not going to be willing or able to buy those flats because they do not have a space on their fridge to storage. On the other hand, if we have consumers bringing the cartons, those go against two regulations. First, the one regulations using the same cartons due to salmonella, and that's a regulation from the FDA. And the other one is that the producers, retailers are more concerned about consumers bringing the cartons and maybe a contamination with COVID-19. Therefore, those two, the bringing a carton is basically something that they have ruled out, an option that has been ruled out. The other another concern that goes along with COVID-19 is the shortage in labor in the ag sector. And do we have a shortage of labor now, or what is going to happen in the future? And what is going on now is that for H-2A, the visa program, the State Department is moving or isn't some of the regulations that they had before. For example, some of the applicants that they do not have any potential red flag and have been here before what they will do is that they will have their interview waived. In that way, the process will be faster, because some of the, well, not some, in many countries, the consulates or embassies are closed. Therefore, if they have to go through an interview before, it will take a long time until the regulations for COVID-19 are eased. So what is going on right now is that they don't have to go. It's just the ones that do not have any red flag will be able to come to the country without going for an interview process. That is going to help producers who have more labor-intensive type of production. For example, the ones that produce vegetables or fruit in Florida or California, that will help, those regulations will help those type of producers by bringing the H2A workers back to the country. There was also, the president just recently announced that he wants to halt immigration, but what this sector is hoping is that it is not going to affect the H2 applicants. For now, what we know is that it's going to affect more H2B holders and the ones that are in the process of the green card.
One of the issues here in terms of looking at the labor issues, this is where largely on the processing side and the many of the meat packing, other kinds of processing, add in the field labor for fruits and vegetable crops. That's where we see a lot of this, a lot of the labor challenges, whether it's workers on temporary visas, whether it's U.S. workers or what. It's just because of the close proximity that they're forced to work in, just the nature of the work. That's where our biggest pressure point is in terms of potential labor issues with COVID-19.
Yeah, what also, thank you, Kevin, for coming to this point, because that's what happened in the meat packing plants. But what in the people in the produce area have said is that their first priority is to keep their workers health and safe. And also they have to, they already are going for required safety trainings like sanitation and washing their hands. And that goes along with the Food Safety Modernization Act. And what they are basically everything that goes along with COVID-19 measures that they have to take. So what they are thinking now is that they just have to be more extreme with what they were already doing in the produce or fruit, vegetables and fruits production.
Okay. All right. The question becomes up, well, are we going to have additional trade disruptions? Certainly it's been in the news a lot over the past year or so. The renegotiations of of NAFTA, the disruptions we've had in terms of a trade disputes with China. This somewhat remains to be seen. There has been some talks as countries start getting pushed, or should they get pushed to the extreme in terms of concerns about food supplies, of maybe turning more towards nationalisms, where restrictions start occurring on what they will allow to be exported in terms of their terms of food. In the U.S., is how big of a concern should this be to us? In terms of ability to feed ourselves as a nation, it's not really a concern at all. In terms of having the variety that we've come to expect. The fresh fruits, fresh vegetables all year long. Some of the specialty kind of products that we like, that we enjoy, certainly will have an impact on that should that come into play. But in terms of being able to feed ourselves in total, no, we will have plenty of food, just perhaps not exactly what you want when you go to the store.
On this one also, in terms of trade, something that has been a concern is whether or not ports will be closed. And so the Department of Homeland Security has the import employees and government inspectors needed to approve all commodities for export as essential critical infrastructure workers. So they basically need to continue working. However, the concern raises because we have seen a disruption in the China side, where they had to basically close the airports due to COVID-19. Where they had test results from someone, for a person who tested positive in the port of Houston, for example. The port had to close, I think one day, but basically they have keep working, and we haven't seen any problem since then. So we shouldn't expect, or we may not expect, something of this happening at the port side.
I guess related to the China point on this slide, in the wake of COVID-19 here, there's no longer any expectation that China can live up to the purchase amounts of U.S. ag products that they talked about in the stage one part of the trade deal. And of course, that was expected to be a big boon for soybeans and hogs possibly. Yeah, we've been hurting on the soybeans in particular for a while with the trade war with China, and our inability to export as much to them as we could have otherwise possibly, which can probably lead into the next slide here. And so that has to do with the grain industry, of course. And again, we can look to prices for some insights in terms of information. There we can see that corn prices are down 20% or so from the start of the year, and soybean prices are down too, but not quite as much. Of course, these numbers aren't as big as what we're seeing in the livestock industry in terms of the price hits that have been taken there. So it's not affecting the grain industry in as great of an amount as it has in the hogs or cattle. But for corn in particular, it's down a little bit more than soybeans because of what we're seeing with people moving about. Less driving means less expenses on fuel, and the linkage there to corn ethanol production in the U.S. So less ethanol demand for corn, helping to push the corn price down a little further there. Taking that into account, the lower price of corn, and also the additional costs and labor intensity of raising corn with chemical applications and stuff. Some producers are talking about going to more soybeans this year after all, which would have been a surprise to hear that a few months back when we were experiencing the aspects of the trade war with China and those effects on the exports of soybeans. All right, so go ahead.
Well, and one of the things, we're looking at grain. Grain farmers have a little bit of a luxury here. If they had priced their grain coming into this year, they wouldn't have been hurt quite as bad on grain sales. And looking into next fall, grain prices will recapture some of those prices. So given they're just looking at getting started on planting now, that they have a several month window here where we have time to continue to work through the issues surrounding the supply chain right now. So a little less pressure on them. Also, their business is, by its nature, they are practicing social isolation, social distancing all the time.
So how are things going to go forward from here? And so what we're seeing, obviously, in many instances has been quite painful for the industry, and some of that's stuff that we're going to experience. And then when we get past the COVID-19 situation, some of that will go back, to the way it was before. But there's also some changes that are coming out of this that could result in some positives. And change can be painful as well. But I think that there are some positive aspects that we can look to here in terms of new services and such that are going to be available to consumers. The growth in consumers' use of things like grocery delivery to your car from the store, or even to your house through certain sort of mail order type of services, the Amazons and that kind of stuff. More and more consumers are probably going to be using that now as a result of going through this experience. And also kind of related to that, probably there's been some opportunities for the local foods business to find ways to serve consumers as well, without them having to leave the house as much. So there are some positives going forward.
And I'd like to thank my team today for helping us put this short presentation together to try to give the public a little bit of understanding of what's happening and how it's likely to impact us in this particular region.